The HOA president called the cops on me in front of my own house. 2 patrol cars rolled up, red and blue lights bouncing off my blacked-out F-350. Delilah, that's the HOA Karen-in-chief, was literally screaming at the officers, "Arrest him! He's got commercial trucks and says he's not in our HOA." An hour earlier, I'd told her, calm as can be, "Ma'am, I've never been in your HOA, never will be." She laughed in my face, slapped another $250 violation on my mailbox, and speed-dialed 911 while stomping back to her golf cart. What she didn't know, while she was calling for backup, I'd been quietly digging through property records for months. What I'd found would flip her little suburban kingdom upside down forever. The police checked my paperwork, tipped their hats, and left. Delilah stood there in her Lily Pulitzer dress, but this was just the beginning. By the time I was done, she wouldn't be my HOA president. She'd be my tenant. Drop your worst HOA horror story below. Where are you watching from? 6 months ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing half my assets in a divorce. Turns out I was wrong. The worst thing was inheriting property next to an HOA president who thinks she's running a small country. I'm Garrett McKenzie, 45, and after my ex-wife cleaned me out in Atlanta, I found myself driving a loaded F-350 toward my grandfather's old farmhouse in Millbrook, Tennessee. The place hadn't been lived in for 5 years. Peeling white paint, sagging porch, and a barn that smelled like decades of motor oil and hay. But it sat on 2.5 acres of land that's been in my family since 1923, and after 3 months on my buddy's couch, it looked like paradise. What I didn't expect was the suburban invasion that had happened while I was gone. Someone had built Willowbrook Estates right up to my property line. 200 identical McMansions with fancy names like the Wellington and the Cambridge. Each house probably cost more than I'd make in 3 years, complete with manicured lawns that looked like golf course greens and driveways you could eat off of. My first morning there, I'm unloading my equipment trailer when I hear the crunch of high heels on gravel. Here comes this blonde woman in her early 50s, hair sprayed into a helmet, carrying a leather folder like she's serving divorce papers. The smell of her perfume hits me from 15 feet away, something that probably costs more per ounce than good whiskey. "Welcome to Willowbrook," she chirps with a smile so fake it could be made in China. "I'm Delilah Thornfield, your HOA president. I brought our community welcome packet." She hands me this brick of papers. Had to be 50 pages bound in expensive cardstock. The thing was heavier than some of my tool catalogs. "That's nice of you," I say. "But there's been a misunderstanding. This property isn't part of any HOA." Her smile twitches like she just bit into a lemon. "Oh, but everyone in this area maintains our community standards. Property values, you understand." I glance around at her cookie-cutter paradise, then back at my grandfather's weathered farmhouse. "Ma'am, this land predates your entire development by about 80 years. McKenzie family's been here since before your grandparents were born." That's when the Southern Belle Act crumbles faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. "Mr.—" Her voice drops 10 degrees. "McKenzie, Garrett McKenzie." "Mr. McKenzie." She says my name like it tastes bad. "I don't think you grasp how things operate here. This is a premier neighborhood with standards." She points her manicured finger at my truck, my trailer, Rusty sniffing around the old tire swing. "All of this needs immediate correction." Correction how? Commercial vehicles must be stored off-property. That eyesore of a barn requires paint or removal, and your lawn needs professional maintenance to match neighborhood aesthetics. She wrinkles her nose like my property personally offended her ancestors. I feel my back teeth grinding. "And if I choose not to make these corrections?" Her smile returns, but now it's all teeth and no warmth. "My husband Bradley serves on the city council. We have relationships throughout county government. I'm confident we can locate appropriate motivations for community cooperation." The threat hangs in the summer air like humidity. Comply or get buried in red tape. She clicks back to her white Mercedes SUV, license plate reading HOA Boss, because apparently subtlety isn't her strong suit, and drives off, leaving the lingering scent of expensive perfume and cheap threats. That evening, I'm sitting on the porch with a cold beer, Rusty sprawled at my feet, watching fireflies dance over the pasture. The sound of central air units humming from the McMansions mixes with the chirp of crickets from my overgrown fields. Something about this whole setup stinks worse than the old barn on a hot day. But what Delilah doesn't know yet is that I spent 15 years in construction, and I've learned a thing or two about property law, title research, and what happens when developers cut corners to save money. 3 days after Delilah's welcome visit, I'm elbow deep in a carburetor rebuild when the rumble of diesel engines breaks the morning quiet. Through my barn doors, I spot a white county truck followed by Delilah's Mercedes cruising up my gravel drive like a funeral procession. Out steps this heavy-set inspector in a wrinkled polo shirt, already sweating in the Tennessee humidity. His clipboard looks thicker than a phone book. Behind him, Delilah emerges wearing designer sunglasses and the kind of smile you see on sharks right before they bite. "Mr. Mackenzie, Rick Jameson, County Code Enforcement," the guy's breathing heavy just from the walk over. "We've received multiple complaints about potential zoning violations on this property." I wipe my greasy hands on a shop rag, taking my sweet time. "What kind of complaints?" Delilah steps forward with her phone already recording. "Commercial vehicles in a residential zone, unlicensed business operations, and possible environmental contamination from automotive fluids." She pronounces each word like she's reading charges at a trial. Now, I spent 15 years in Atlanta construction, and you don't survive that business without knowing every zoning law by heart. One missed permit can bankrupt you faster than a bad divorce lawyer. So when Inspector Jameson starts measuring distances with his metal tape, that sharp zinging sound echoing off my barn walls, I'm already 3 steps ahead of him. But here's what catches my attention. The way Jameson keeps glancing back at Delilah, like a student checking his teacher's face during a test. His questions sound rehearsed, coached. Someone's been feeding him information. "Inspector," I say while he's measuring my equipment trailer, "what's the official zoning classification for this property?" He flips through his paperwork, sweat dripping onto the pages. Let's see here. Appears to be agricultural residential mixed use. And what does ag residential allow for vehicle storage?" More paper shuffling. The sweet smell of honeysuckle from my back pasture mixes with the sharp scent of WD-40 from my morning's work. "Well, agricultural residential permits commercial vehicle storage for property-related activities, mechanical work within legal hours, and..." His voice trails off as reality dawns. "Equipment storage for agricultural and construction purposes," I finish for him, "which covers everything you're looking at." Delilah's confidence cracks like ice in spring. "Surely there are noise ordinances, environmental regulations." "Ma'am," Jameson interrupts, mopping his forehead again, "everything here appears fully compliant, proper zoning, no environmental hazards visible, work activities within approved hours." He snaps his clipboard shut. "No violations to cite." You could have heard a pin drop. Delilah stands there opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water, while Jameson beats a hasty retreat to his truck. But that evening, something's nagging at me. The whole inspection felt too orchestrated, too targeted. So I drive over to the county courthouse, timing it to arrive just before closing. The records clerk, a sweet old lady named Mrs. Patterson, helps me pull the original property surveys from their dusty filing cabinets. That's when I hit gold. The musty smell of decades-old paper fills my nostrils as I spread out survey maps from the 1920s. My current 2.5 acres? Just a tiny slice of what used to be a 40-acre Mackenzie family farm. But here's the kicker buried in the fine print. When my great-grandfather started selling off parcels in the 1960s, he kept the mineral rights to the entire original tract. My construction experience taught me that mineral rights in Tennessee include everything below 6 feet, foundations, basements, septic systems, utility lines. If those rights were never properly transferred, then technically every house in Willowbrook Estates sits on land my family still owns underneath. The next morning, I'm feeling pretty good about life. I install a hand-painted sign at my driveway entrance. Mackenzie Farm, Estine 1923, private property. Nothing fancy, but it makes the point. I also set up security cameras along my property lines. After yesterday's ambush inspection, I want every interaction documented. Then I do something that really gets under Delilah's skin. I officially open Mackenzie Small Engine Repair. Perfectly legal under my zoning, and I've got neighbors lined up with broken lawnmowers and chainsaws that need fixing. The sound of 2-stroke engines firing up echoes across the valley all afternoon. Sure enough, by evening I spot Delilah's white Mercedes making slow passes by my driveway, phone glued to her ear, probably speed dialing every government office in the county. But while she's burning up the phone lines complaining about me, I'm making calls of my own, to a property attorney who specializes in title disputes and mineral rights. Because something tells me those dusty old surveys are going to be worth their weight in gold. What Delilah doesn't realize yet is that her harassment campaign just gave me the motivation to dig deeper into something that could change everything. A week goes by, nice and quiet. I'm thinking maybe Delilah got the message after her inspection backfired. Then Tuesday morning, I'm having coffee on my porch when I see the first patrol car pull into my driveway. Officer Martinez steps out. Young guy, probably early 30s, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning, Mr. McKenzie. We got a call about suspicious activity. Mind if I take a look around?" Suspicious how? He checks his notepad, clearly reading from someone else's words. Anonymous caller reported possible drug manufacturing. Unusual chemical odors, frequent visitors at odd hours. I nearly spit out my coffee. Drug manufacturing? I'm running carburetor cleaner and WD-40, not cooking meth. But I let him look around because I've got nothing to hide. 15 minutes later, he's shaking his head and apologizing for wasting my time. That afternoon, another call. This time it's about Rusty being aggressive toward children. Officer Martinez shows up again, takes one look at my border collie, who's currently belly up getting scratched by the neighbor kid from across the street, and just sighs. "Let me guess," he says. "Anonymous complaint?" "How'd you know?" "Third call today from the same phone number claiming to be different people. Same voice every time." He scratches behind Rusty's ears. "Nice dog. Wouldn't hurt a fly." By Thursday, it's noise complaints during legal working hours. Friday brings reports of commercial truck traffic endangering pedestrians, even though the nearest sidewalk is half a mile away. Martinez starts pulling up my driveway and just waving instead of getting out. But the pattern's clear. Delilah's weaponizing the police department. That's when Martinez does something unexpected. After the 6th bogus call in 2 weeks, he pulls me aside while pretending to inspect my shop. "Off the record," he says quietly, glancing around like we're sharing state secrets. "Document everything. Times, dates, what was reported versus what was actually happening. Get a lawyer if you can afford one." "Why?" "Because the lady making these calls, her husband sits on the city council. Word around the station is she's got connections all the way up to the county commissioner." He adjusts his radio, the static crackling in the summer heat. Some of us don't appreciate being used as personal harassment squads. That evening, I start a detailed log. Every bogus police call, every drive-by documentation session, every interaction. My construction days taught me that paperwork wins legal battles. I once saw a contractor lose a $50,000 lawsuit because he couldn't prove when work was completed. But I'm also reaching out to folks in the neighborhood who seem friendly. Mrs. Finley from down the road brings me homemade cookies and some interesting gossip. Turns out I'm not Delilah's first target. She went after the Johnsons for having a vegetable garden, Mrs. Finley tells me, settling into my porch rocker with a plate of chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. Called it agricultural activity incompatible with residential aesthetics. Made them tear out 30 years of tomato plants. What about the Morrisons? Jake's motorcycle said it violated noise ordinances even though he only rode it to work and back. Delilah organized a petition to get his HOA privileges revoked. She shakes her head, gray hair catching the evening light. That boy served 2 tours in Afghanistan, comes home to this. The picture's getting clearer. Delilah doesn't just hate nonconformity. She's got a pattern of targeting people who don't fit her suburban ideal. The Johnsons are an elderly black couple. Jake Morrison is a young veteran with PTSD who keeps to himself. And now me, a divorced contractor with work trucks. Next morning, I'm documenting Delilah's latest drive-by photo session when Jake Morrison walks up my driveway. He's maybe 25, solid build, crew cut, with the kind of calm intensity you see in guys who've been places and done things. "Heard you're having trouble with the neighborhood watch committee," he says with a sardonic grin. "That what we're calling it?" Among other things. He nods toward Delilah's house, where we can see her telephoto lens glinting from an upstairs window. She's been documenting my suspicious activities for months. Apparently, working on my bike in my own garage qualifies as disturbing the peace. We shake hands. His grip has the roughness of someone who works with his tools, not just his mouth. Jake Morrison, combat engineer, currently employed as Delilah's least favorite neighbor. Garrett McKenzie, recent divorcee, currently employed as professional thorn in Delilah's side. That's when Jake mentioned something interesting. "You know she's been measuring the distance from your property line to the road? Taking photos with one of those surveyor's wheels? Why would she do that? Heard her telling someone on the phone that your driveway might be encroaching on county right-of-way. Something about forcing you to move your vehicles back. But here's what Jake doesn't know, and what Delilah definitely doesn't know. When I pulled those property records last week, I had them verify my boundary lines too. Turns out my property extends 3 feet further toward the road than anyone thought, including about 2 feet under Delilah's perfectly manicured front lawn. That night, I'm sitting on my porch with Jake, sharing a beer and watching Delilah's house. The smell of honeysuckle drifts across the evening air, mixed with the distant hum of air conditioners working overtime against the heat. She's gonna escalate, Jake says quietly. I'm counting on it. 2 weeks later, Delilah decides to go nuclear. I'm checking my mail when a guy in a cheap suit walks up my driveway carrying an envelope thick enough to choke a mule. Garrett McKenzie, you've been served. The letterhead reads, Thornfield and Associates, Attorneys at Law. Apparently Bradley's got his own law firm. The cease and desist letter is printed on paper so expensive it practically crinkles with arrogance. According to this masterpiece, my commercial activities are creating a nuisance that's causing irreparable harm to property values throughout Willowbrook Estates. They're threatening a $50,000 lawsuit for intentional interference with neighboring property values. The legal language is thick as molasses, but the message is crystal clear: shut down or get buried in legal bills. That afternoon, I decide it's time to get serious about my property lines. I call Hendricks Surveying, same company that did the original Willowbrook development. When Bobby Hendricks shows up with his equipment, he's scratching his head before he even starts measuring. Something weird about this boundary setup, he tells me, squinting at his GPS unit. The original developer's survey doesn't match county records. For 3 hours, Bobby's out there with his transit and measuring chains, the metallic clink of his equipment mixing with the sound of cicadas buzzing in my oak trees. Meanwhile, Delilah's positioned herself in her front yard like she's watching a tennis match, phone camera documenting every measurement. When Bobby finishes, he calls me over with the expression I can't quite read. Garrett, you need to see this. He spreads his survey map across my tailgate, the paper warm from sitting in the sun. Your property line runs here, he traces with his finger, which puts Mrs. Thornfield's decorative fence about 3 feet onto your land. You're kidding. Nope. And that garden shed? That's sitting entirely on your property. He points toward Delilah's backyard, where a fancy storage building sits tucked behind some ornamental bushes. Been there maybe 5 years, from the look of it. I can practically feel the gears clicking in my head. What about that flower bed along the front? Bobby checks his measurements again. Yep, her prize-winning roses, growing in your dirt. This is what we call in construction a gotcha moment. For 2 months, Delilah's been harassing me about property standards while she's been trespassing on my land. The irony tastes sweeter than my grandmother's peach cobbler. That evening, I draft a certified letter to Delilah. Nothing fancy. Just a polite notification that her fence, shed, and flower garden are encroaching on my property, along with a 30-day notice to remove them. I include Bobby's official survey as evidence. The next morning brings a minor earthquake in suburbia. I'm drinking coffee on my porch when I hear Delilah's voice carrying across the morning air like a fire siren. She's standing in her yard, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly at the survey stakes Bobby left behind. That's impossible. We had this surveyed when we bought the house. Her voice hits a pitch that could shatter glass. I don't care what his survey says. Get someone out here today. By noon, she's got her own surveyor out there, some nervous-looking guy who keeps checking and rechecking his measurements. The smell of fresh-cut grass from her lawn service mingles with exhaust from his truck as he packs up his equipment with a defeated expression. But Delilah's not done. That afternoon brings the most desperate move yet. She shows up at my door with what I can only describe as a bribe attempt. Mr. McKenzie, she says through gritted teeth that could cut steel, perhaps we can reach a reasonable accommodation. The property line issue seems to be a simple misunderstanding. How's that? Well, clearly there are conflicting surveys. Rather than involve lawyers and courts, maybe you'd consider selling me a small strip of land to resolve the boundary dispute. She pulls out a folded check. I'm prepared to offer $15,000 for a 10-foot easement. 15 grand for land she's already been using for free? And calling it an accommodation? This woman's got brass that could outfit a marching band. I'll need to think about it, I tell her. keeping my voice neutral while my phone records every word of this conversation from my shirt pocket. Of course, but I should mention, continued boundary disputes can get very expensive. Court costs, attorney fees, expert witnesses. Her smile could freeze hell over. My husband has relationships throughout the legal community. Sometimes these cases drag on for years. There it is, the threat wrapped in a bow. Pay me or face endless legal warfare. After she leaves, I call my new favorite person, Sarah Blackwood, the property attorney I found who specializes in boundary disputes and title issues. When I play her the recording of Delilah's accommodation offer, Sarah actually laughs. "Congratulations," she says. "She just handed you a slam dunk case for attempted extortion. But more importantly, that survey you commissioned, it's going to open up some very interesting questions about the entire Willowbrook development." That night, Jake Morrison stops by to help me install motion-activated lights along my actual property lines. The LED floods are bright enough to illuminate a football field and aim directly at the disputed areas. "Think she'll notice?" Jake asks, admiring our handiwork. "Oh, she'll notice. Question is, what's she gonna do about it?" The next morning, I'm at the courthouse bright and early with Sarah Blackwood. She's maybe 40, sharp as a tack, with the kind of confidence that comes from winning cases other lawyers won't touch. We're diving deeper into those property records, and what we find makes my head spin. This is either the sloppiest title work I've ever seen, or someone was cutting corners, Sarah says, spreading out documents across the records room table. The musty smell of old paper fills the air as she points to a survey from 2014. Look at this legal description versus the original 1960s deed. The more we dig, the worse it gets. Pinnacle Properties, the company that developed Willowbrook, apparently never bothered to do a complete title search. They bought surface development rights from various landowners, but missed some crucial details buried in the fine print of deeds going back 60 years. "Here's the smoking gun," Sarah says, pulling out a faded document from 1962. "When your great-grandfather started selling off parcels of the original Mackenzie farm, he explicitly retained all subsurface mineral rights to the entire 40-acre tract." She traces her finger along the property description. That means everything below 6 feet deep, foundations, basements, septic systems, utility lines, sits on land your family never sold. My construction background kicks in. So, legally, you may have legitimate claim to the subsurface rights under every house in Willowbrook Estates. Sarah's grin could light up a football stadium. But it gets better. Pinnacle Properties filed for bankruptcy in 2018, which means their development contracts may have reverted to the original property owners. She pulls up the bankruptcy filing on her laptop. "Look at this. They owed $2 million in unpaid contractor bills, had 3 EPA violations for improper wetland mitigation, and never completed the required environmental impact studies." What does that mean for the current homeowners? Technically, their property deeds may not be worth the paper they're printed on. The entire development was built on questionable legal foundation. Sarah leans back in her chair, clearly enjoying this puzzle. But here's the real kicker. Guess who was the city councilman who fast-tracked Pinnacle's permits back in 2014? I don't need to guess. Bradley Thornfield. Bingo. And according to campaign finance records, Bradley received substantial contributions from Pinnacle Properties right before the permit approvals went through. She turns her laptop screen toward me. "This isn't just about property rights anymore, Garrett. This could be a corruption case." Whoa. The pieces are falling together like dominoes. Delilah's husband helped approve a development built on shaky legal ground, possibly took money to expedite the process, and now they're both trying to force me out before anyone discovers the truth. "What are my options?" I ask. "We file a quiet title action. That's a lawsuit asking the court to determine who actually owns what. We'll need to notify every property owner in Willowbrook about the potential cloud on their titles." Sarah's already making notes. "Given the evidence, I'd say you've got better than even odds of winning substantial subsurface rights. And if I win? Then technically you become the subsurface landlord for 127 homes. You could charge ground rent, require lease agreements, or..." She pauses dramatically. "You could offer to sell clear title to the homeowners for fair market value." The irony is so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw. Delilah's been harassing me for months about property values and community standards while living in a house that might legally sit on land my family still owns. How long does this process take? 6 months, maybe 8 if they fight it. But here's the beautiful part. Every harassment incident, every bogus police call, every threat they've made just strengthens your case for damages. Sarah closes her laptop with satisfaction. They've been building your case for you. Walking out of the courthouse, I feel like I'm carrying dynamite in my briefcase. The question now isn't whether I can fight back against Delilah's harassment. It's how much of Willowbrook Estates I'm about to own when the dust settles. Time to start playing offense instead of defense. That afternoon, Sarah and I are back at my kitchen table, papers spread everywhere like we're planning a military campaign. The smell of fresh coffee mingles with the scent of honeysuckle drifting through my open windows as we map out our strategy. First step is filing the quiet title action, Sarah explains, highlighting sections of legal documents with a yellow marker. But we need to be smart about this. Once we file, every homeowner in Willowbrook gets notified that their property titles are in dispute. That's going to cause a panic. Exactly. Which is why we document everything first. She pulls out a thick folder. Every harassment incident, every bogus police call, every threat Delilah's made. We build an ironclad case that you're the injured party here, not some opportunistic land grabber. While Sarah handles the legal strategy, I'm working on something equally important, building allies in the neighborhood. That evening, Mrs. Finley stops by with another plate of cookies and some valuable intelligence. Delilah called an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night, she tells me, settling into my porch rocker. She's planning to present what she calls the Mackenzie problem to the board. What kind of problem? According to the agenda she posted, you're supposedly running an unlicensed auto repair business, storing hazardous materials, and threatening property values. Mrs. Finley shakes her head, gray curls catching the evening light. But here's what she doesn't know. Half the board is fed up with her tactics. Turns out Delilah's made more enemies than friends. The Hendersons got cited for having the wrong shade of mailbox. The Patels were fined for parking their hybrid in the driveway instead of the garage. Even the Williamses, who've lived here since the development opened, got violation notices for their vegetable garden. People are tired of living under a microscope, Mrs. Finley explains. Some of us have been quietly organizing. Yes, Jake Morrison confirms this when he stops by later. There's definitely a resistance movement brewing. Problem is, most folks are scared to speak up because of Bradley's political connections. What if they knew those connections might not matter much longer? Jake raises an eyebrow. You got something cooking? I can't reveal the legal strategy yet, but I can prepare the groundwork. Over the next few days, I start offering free, small engine repairs to anyone who needs them. Word spreads quickly in a neighborhood where most people pay premium prices for lawn care services. By week's end, I've fixed mowers for the Johnsons, the Finleys, and 3 other families. Each conversation reveals more of Delilah's pattern of harassment targeting anyone who doesn't fit her suburban ideal. The stories would make your blood boil. Elderly folks intimidated, veterans hassled, minorities singled out for violations that white neighbors get away with. But I'm also learning something else important. Most of these families love their homes and invested their life savings in Willowbrook. The last thing they want is a legal battle that could cloud their property titles. This whole situation needs to be handled delicately. Meanwhile, Sarah's burning the midnight oil researching similar cases. She discovers that quiet title actions involving mineral rights are more common than you'd think, especially in Tennessee, where coal and mineral extraction shaped property law for decades. Here's the precedent we need, she tells me, pointing to a 1987 case. Family in East Tennessee won subsurface rights to an entire subdivision because the developer failed to properly acquire mineral rights from the original landowners. Court awarded them ground lease payments going back to the development's construction. The legal principle is called adverse possession in reverse. Instead of someone claiming your land by using it, you're reclaiming land that was never properly transferred in the first place. One crucial detail. Tennessee law requires property owners to actively assert their rights within a reasonable time frame after discovering the violation. That's why Delilah's harassment actually helps us, Sarah explains over Chinese takeout containers in my kitchen. Every documented incident proves you've been actively asserting your property rights since moving here. You're not some opportunistic outsider, you're a property owner defending legitimate claims. By Friday, I've got everything in place. Security cameras document every interaction. Detailed logs record every harassment incident, and a growing network of neighbors supports my version of events. More importantly, I've got rock-solid legal grounds for the quiet title claim. That evening, Jake and Mrs. Finley helped me organize what I'm calling a community information session for Sunday afternoon. Nothing formal, just neighbors gathering to discuss property rights and community standards. We're careful not to mention the legal action. That bombshell needs to drop at exactly the right moment. Think people will show up? Jake asks as we set up folding chairs in my barn. Oh, they'll show up. Question is whether they'll still be talking to me after they hear what I've discovered. Saturday night, I'm sitting on my porch with Rusty, watching lights come on in houses across Willowbrook Estates. Each one represents a family who thinks they own their piece of the American dream. Tomorrow, I'm going to tell them their dream might be built on someone else's land. The irony tastes bitter as black coffee. Delilah wanted to run me out of the neighborhood to protect property values. Instead, she's about to learn that harassing the wrong neighbor can cost a lot more than hurt feelings. Sunday afternoon arrives with the kind of oppressive heat that makes smart folks stay indoors. But my barn is packed, maybe 30 neighbors plus a few faces I don't recognize. The smell of fresh hay mixed with motor oil creates an odd backdrop for what's about to become the most explosive community meeting in Willowbrook's history. I'm halfway through explaining property rights basics when Delilah makes her grand entrance. She sweeps through the barn doors like she owns the place, followed by 2 local news reporters and a cameraman. Apparently someone tipped off Channel 7 about a neighborhood property dispute threatening home values. Ladies and gentlemen, she announces in her best pageant voice, I apologize for interrupting this gathering, but as your elected HOA president, I feel obligated to address the misinformation being spread about our community. The reporter, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a microphone that probably costs more than my truck payment, immediately focuses on Delilah. Mrs. Thornfield, can you explain why you called our newsroom about this situation? Certainly. We have a resident who's operating an unlicensed commercial business, storing hazardous materials, and now apparently holding unauthorized community meetings. Delilah gestures toward me like I'm a wanted criminal. Property values in Willowbrook have dropped 15% since this situation began. That 15% figure is pure fiction, but it sounds official enough for television. I can see some neighbors shifting nervously, probably calculating their home equity in real time. But here's where Delilah's media strategy backfires spectacularly. Mrs. Finley stands up, all 5 feet of her radiating quiet dignity. Excuse me, but I'd like to address those accusations. Moss. She turns toward the camera with the composure of someone who spent 30 years teaching middle school. Mrs. Thornfield has been systematically harassing minority families in this neighborhood for years. The Johnsons, the Patels, my own family, all cited for violations that somehow don't apply to her friends. Jake Morrison rises from his folding chair, and I'd like to know where that 15% property value drop figure comes from, since county records show home values here have actually increased 8% this year. The reporter's attention shifts faster than a weather vane in a tornado. Suddenly, this isn't a simple story about a troublesome neighbor, it's about HOA corruption and possible discrimination. Delilah's face flushes red as a fire truck. These people are clearly biased. Ma'am, Jake interrupts with military precision. I'm a combat veteran with 2 Bronze Stars. Mrs. Finley taught school for 3 decades. What exactly makes us biased? That's when the cameraman spots something interesting. While Delilah's been performing for the camera, I've been quietly setting up a presentation board with survey maps and property documents. The camera swings toward me as I start explaining the boundary dispute. For the record, I tell the reporter, Mrs. Thornfield's decorative fence sits 3 feet onto my property, and her garden shed is entirely on land she doesn't own. We offered to resolve this privately, but she chose to escalate with legal threats and police harassment instead. I pull out Bobby Hendrick's official survey, spreading it across a hay bale where the camera can capture every detail. This is a certified boundary survey showing the encroachment. Mrs. Thornfield was notified 30 days ago and chose to ignore it. The reporter's eyes light up like Christmas morning. Property disputes make great television, especially when they involve HOA drama and potential corruption. But Delilah's not finished. In a move that proves desperation makes people stupid, she decides to double down. Mr. McKenzie is clearly trying to extort money from our community through frivolous legal claims. My husband serves on the city council, and we have documentation proving this property was properly surveyed and approved. There it is. The threat wrapped in political connections, broadcast live on local television. So, you're saying your husband's political position gives you influence over property disputes? the reporter asks, sensing blood in the water. Delilah realizes her mistake too late. That's not what I meant. But the damage is done. On live television, she just implied that her husband uses his city council position to handle personal disputes. The reporter's already taking notes for what's clearly becoming a much bigger story about municipal corruption. After the news crew packs up and leaves, the barn erupts in conversations. Some neighbors are clearly shaken by the boundary dispute revelations. Others are angry about years of HOA harassment finally being exposed. A few are worried about their property values if this escalates to court. Mrs. Finley approaches me as folks start filing out. When were you planning to tell us about the legal action you're filing? I look at her in surprise. How did you... Honey, I've been around long enough to recognize a lawyer's paperwork when I see it. She nods toward Sarah's documents still spread across my workbench. Plus, Mrs. Patterson at the courthouse is my bridge partner. She mentioned you've been doing some very interesting research. That evening, Jake stops by to help me clean up the barn. The folding chairs stack with metallic clanks that echo in the gathering dusk. Think that went well? He asks. Better than I hoped. Delilah just threatened a combat veteran and a retired teacher on live television while admitting her husband uses political influence for personal disputes. Yeah, but now she knows people are organizing against her. She's going to get desperate. As if summoned by our conversation, we hear the distant sound of Delilah's voice carrying across the evening air, apparently giving someone a very animated phone call from her back deck. Think we should be worried? Jake asks. Probably. Desperate people do stupid things, and Delilah's got connections throughout county government. I lock up the barn, the metal door clanging shut. Question is, how stupid is she willing to get? Monday morning brings the fallout from Sunday's media circus. I'm barely finished with coffee when my phone starts buzzing with text messages. Apparently, Channel 7's story about HOA corruption and property disputes in Millbrook County aired during the morning news. By noon, I've got reporters from 3 different outlets calling for interviews. But more importantly, I've got angry calls from neighbors who just learned their property titles might be in question. Is it true our house might be sitting on land you own? It's Bob Henderson, voice tight with stress. Because if our deed isn't valid, we could lose everything we've invested here. This is exactly what I was worried about. Innocent families getting caught in legal crossfire because some developer cut corners 15 years ago. I spend most of Monday returning calls, trying to reassure folks that any resolution would protect existing homeowners. But while I'm playing defense with worried neighbors, Delilah's playing offense with her political connections. Tuesday morning, I'm welding a cracked trailer hitch when 3 black SUVs roll up my driveway like a presidential motorcade. Out steps a small army of officials, county environmental inspector, state building code enforcement, fire marshal, and someone from the health department who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. McKenzie, we're here about multiple complaints regarding potential safety violations on this property. The lead inspector, a thin guy with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard thick as a phone book, starts reading from a list that could choke a mule. Allegedly hazardous material storage, potential groundwater contamination from automotive fluids, fire safety violations in the barn, septic system non-compliance. It's a fishing expedition, pure and simple. Someone with serious pull made some phone calls, and now I'm getting the full regulatory treatment. For 4 hours, they crawl over every inch of my property with instruments that beep and click and measure everything from soil pH to air quality. The metallic sound of sample containers clanging together mixes with the distant hum of their vehicle's air conditioning working overtime in the heat. But here's the thing about running a legitimate operation. When you follow the rules, surprise inspections aren't that scary. My septic system was inspected and certified when I moved in. My automotive fluids are stored in approved containers on concrete pads. My barn meets fire safety codes because I had it updated to run my repair business. By late afternoon, they're packing up equipment with the defeated expressions of people who came looking for violations and found a textbook example of regulatory compliance. Everything appears to be in order, the lead inspector admits, clearly disappointed. All permits current, safety systems functional, environmental standards met. After they leave, I call Sarah Blackwood. Someone with serious juice just tried to bury me in bureaucratic harassment. Let me guess, every agency that showed up today required a formal complaint to trigger an inspection? Yep. and formal complaints require someone to sign their name to the allegations, which means we can subpoena those complaint records during discovery. Sarah's voice carries the satisfaction of a hunter who just spotted prey. Whoever orchestrated this just handed us evidence of coordinated harassment using government resources. That evening brings the most desperate move yet. Delilah shows up at my door just after sunset, but this time she's not alone. She's brought her husband Bradley, a soft-looking man in his 50s with politician's hair and a smile that never reaches his eyes. "Mr. Mackenzie," Bradley says in the smooth voice of someone accustomed to making problems disappear, "I understand there's been some confusion about property boundaries and development permits." "No confusion on my end. Your wife's been trespassing, and your permits might not be worth the paper they're printed on." His smile tightens like a guitar string about to snap. "Well, that's what we'd like to discuss. As a city councilman, I have some insight into how these property disputes typically resolve themselves." Here comes the threat wrapped in velvet gloves. See, property title challenges can drag through courts for years. Very expensive, lots of publicity, hard on everyone involved, especially families who just want to live peacefully in their homes. He pauses to let that sink in. On the other hand, reasonable people can usually find mutually beneficial solutions. Delilah jumps in with barely contained desperation. "We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement, $50,000 to withdraw any legal claims and sign a boundary agreement recognizing existing property lines. 50 grand to make this all go away. Not bad money, except it's chump change compared to what I might win in court. More importantly, it would leave all my neighbors vulnerable to future harassment from these two." "And if I'm not feeling reasonable?" I ask. Bradley's political mask slips just a little. "Then you might find that county government has a very long memory for troublemakers. Permit applications get delayed, inspections become more frequent, business licenses face unexpected scrutiny." He straightens his tie with manicured fingers. "I'd hate to see a newcomer struggle unnecessarily with bureaucratic complications." There it is, naked political corruption offered like a casual conversation topic. These people are so used to buying their way out of problems, they can't imagine anyone saying no. What they don't know is that my phone's been recording this entire conversation from my shirt pocket. "I appreciate the offer," I tell them, "but I think I'll take my chances with the legal system." After they leave, I sit on my porch watching their Mercedes disappear down the driveway, red taillights fading into the gathering darkness. The smell of honeysuckle hangs heavy in the humid air, mixed with the distant sound of air conditioners humming from their subdivision. Tomorrow, Sarah files the quiet title action. After that, there's no going back for any of us. 3 weeks later, the Willowbrook HOA holds its monthly meeting in the community clubhouse. Normally, these gatherings attract maybe a dozen residents discussing lawn care schedules and pool maintenance. Tonight, the parking lot looks like Black Friday at the mall. 200 folding chairs pack the main room, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Local news crews have set up cameras near the front, their bright lights making the whole scene feel like a court trial. The air conditioning struggles against the crowd, creating a humid tension you could cut with a knife. Sarah and I sit in the back row, thick legal folders in our laps like loaded weapons. The quiet title action was filed yesterday, which means every property owner in Willowbrook received certified mail explaining that their land titles are now in legal dispute. You can imagine how well that went over. Delilah takes the podium wearing her best political smile, but I can see stress cracks around her eyes. "Good evening, neighbors. I know many of you have questions about the recent legal situation affecting our community." "Questions?" shouts someone from the middle of the crowd. "Lady, my mortgage company is demanding title insurance verification because of this lawsuit." The room erupts in angry voices. Property owners demanding answers. Younger families worried about refinancing. Retirees whose home equity represents their entire nest egg. The sound builds like an approaching thunderstorm. "Please, everyone, let me explain." Delilah tries to regain control, but the crowd isn't having it. Mrs. Finley stands up near the front, her teacher's voice cutting through the chaos. "Mrs. Thornfield, perhaps you could start by explaining why you've been harassing Mr. Mackenzie for months instead of addressing the actual property title issues." That's when Bradley Thornfield makes his entrance, sliding through the crowd like a politician working a campaign rally. He whispers something in Delilah's ear, then takes the microphone. "Folks, I'm Bradley Thornfield, your city councilman and Delilah's husband. What we have here is a frivolous lawsuit from a disgruntled neighbor trying to extort money from hard-working families. The crowd murmurs uncertainly. Bradley's got that political polish that makes complicated problems sound simple. Mr. Mackenzie moved here 6 months ago and immediately began causing problems. Unlicensed business operations, property maintenance violations, harassment of neighbors through bogus boundary claims. He points toward me like a prosecutor identifying the defendant. Now he's using our legal system to terrorize families with baseless property title challenges. That's my cue. I stand up slowly, Sarah's legal folders in my hands. Mr. Thornfield, since you mentioned baseless claims, would you like to explain why Pinnacle Properties received fast-track permit approval in 2014 right after making substantial campaign contributions to your election fund? The room goes dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the carpeted floor. Bradley's political smile freezes like ice water. That's completely inappropriate. Or maybe, I continue, walking toward the front of the room, you'd like to explain why the environmental impact studies required for this development were never actually completed. Sarah joins me, spreading documents across a nearby table where the news cameras can capture every page. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've discovered is that this entire subdivision was built on fraudulent permits and incomplete title transfers. The crowd's attention shifts like iron filings following a magnet. Suddenly, this isn't about one troublemaker. It's about whether their entire neighborhood was legally constructed. The original developer, Pinnacle Properties, never properly acquired subsurface mineral rights to this land, Sarah explains in her clear attorney voice. They filed for bankruptcy in 2018, which means their development contracts may have reverted to the original property owners. What does that mean for us? Someone shouts from the back. It means, I say, opening the thick folder of evidence, that every foundation, basement, and septic system in Willowbrook may be sitting on land that was never legally transferred to your property deeds. The room explodes in panic, people shouting questions, demanding answers, some heading for the exits to call their lawyers. But I'm not finished. Mrs. Thornfield, I say, turning toward Delilah, who's gone pale as winter snow, would you like to tell everyone about the bribery attempt you and your husband made last week? Before she can answer, I pull out my phone and hit play on the recorded conversation. Bradley's voice fills the room through the PA system. County government has a very long memory for troublemakers. Permit applications get delayed. Inspections become more frequent. The news cameras swing toward Bradley like heat-seeking missiles. His political career just died on live television. The truth is, I announced to the packed room, I don't want to hurt anyone in this community. You're good people who invested your life savings in homes you believed were legally yours. My fight isn't with you. It's with the people who created this mess through corruption and corner cutting. The county commissioner, who'd been sitting quietly in the front row, stands up with the expression of someone watching his re-election chances evaporate. Mr. Mackenzie, he says carefully, what exactly are you proposing? I look around the room at 200 worried faces, then back at Delilah, who's now crying quietly into her hands. I'm proposing we fix this the right way, together. 6 months later, I'm standing in the same clubhouse, but the atmosphere couldn't be more different. Instead of panicked property owners, I'm looking at neighbors celebrating the grand opening of the Willowbrook Community Center, funded by the settlement money from our legal victory. The quiet title action succeeded beyond Sarah's wildest predictions. The court confirmed my family's subsurface rights to the entire development, awarded damages for harassment, and, most importantly, forced a complete audit of Pinnacle Properties' original permits and contracts. What we found was worse than anyone imagined. Environmental shortcuts, building code violations, and a paper trail of corruption involving 3 county commissioners and a state environmental official. Bradley Thornfield resigned from the city council and faces federal charges for accepting bribes. Delilah moved to Florida, where I hear she's keeping a very low profile. But instead of bankrupting 127 families, we found a better solution. Rather than evict people from homes they'd purchased in good faith, I worked with Sarah to create fair ground lease agreements. Every homeowner can buy clear title to their property for a nominal fee, usually less than a year's HOA dues. The settlement money covers legal costs and provides compensation for all the harassment victims. More importantly, we established the first democratically elected community board in Willowbrook's history. Mrs. Finley serves as president, Jake Morrison handles security and maintenance, and they've reduced effective HOA fees by 60% while actually improving community services. The changes go deeper than politics. Without Delilah's reign of terror, people started talking to each other again. The Johnsons replanted their vegetable garden, bigger than before. Jake's motorcycle club meets monthly at the community center, teaching kids basic maintenance skills. Mrs. Patel started a spice garden that makes the whole neighborhood smell like heaven on summer evenings. My small engine repair business is thriving, but I've expanded into something more meaningful. The Mackenzie Property Rights Foundation helps rural families facing developer pressure, providing free legal research and title verification services. We've already prevented 3 similar situations from exploding into full legal battles. Sarah Blackwood joined our board of directors and handles the complex cases. Turns out there are a lot of developers who cut corners on title work, counting on homeowners being too scared or poor to challenge them in court. Personal healing came slower, but deeper. That librarian who helped with my property research? Her name's Emma, and she's sitting on my front porch right now, reading while Rusty sleeps at her feet. Turns out quiet evenings and honest conversation can heal wounds that money and lawyers can't touch. The property where this all started looks different too. I kept the old farmhouse but added a modern workshop behind the barn. The sign at the driveway entrance reads Mackenzie Farm, City, 1923, community welcome, and people actually stop by just to chat about old times and new projects. Every summer we host the Willowbrook Heritage Festival, celebrating the land's history from farming community to modern neighborhood. Kids learn about agriculture, adults share stories, and everyone remembers that communities work best when people cooperate instead of trying to control each other. The legal lessons from this case spread beyond our little corner of Tennessee. Property rights attorneys now teach the Willowbrook precedent in law schools. Always verify title history before purchasing property. Developers sometimes promise more than they own. Always document harassment. Evidence wins cases. And never underestimate the power of ordinary people standing up to bullies with political connections. But the most important lesson isn't legal, it's human. When you treat people with respect and honesty, most of them return the favor. When you stand up for what's right, others find the courage to stand with you. And sometimes, the best revenge against someone trying to destroy your community is building something better in its place. Last week, I got a letter from Delilah. A short note apologizing for the harassment and admitting she let fear and pride override common sense. She's working as a real estate agent in Pensacola, apparently helping buyers verify property titles and avoid the kind of mess she helped create here. People can change, communities can heal, and sometimes fighting for your rights means everyone wins in the end. So here's my question for you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, property dispute, or neighbor from hell? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and you never know when your experience might help someone else facing a similar battle. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button for more David versus Goliath property battles where the little guy wins through preparation, persistence, and community support.